lot of the things that happened, I just thought was, man, this is weird. And I started to think, okay, well, there's something medically wrong here. I went to see him one time at his apartment, and he just told me, he said, sometimes, Vaughn, when I'm sleeping, I wake up and there's a dog that sits at the foot of my bed, and he tells me to follow him. And when I wake up, he says, I find myself out in the forest on my hands and knees in my underwear.
That's the voice of Vaughn, brother of Ted, a young man battling his way through a terrifying mental disorder that at this point in his story, he didn't know he had.
Well, if I thought that things were getting bad, I was about to find out that not only could they get even worse, they could get downright catastrophic.
After suffering a nervous breakdown overseas in mid-1990, Ted moved home to his parents in Manitoba. Months later, with no work, a long-distance romance on the rocks, and family tensions running high, Ted's deluded brain convinced him his mother was controlled by a demon. His clumsy attempt to exorcise it ended with Ted alone and homeless.
This was the middle of winter, and I had no money, no place to stay. But my dad said, I'll put you up in a hotel. I'll pay for a one-night stay, and after that, you're on your own. So that's what he did.
Now, very alone with a very fragile mind, Ted is about to embark on a reality-bending odyssey that will take him from the depths of despair to the wildest heights of delusion. With insights from Ted's brothers, Vaughn and Peter, and Associate Professor at the University of Calgary, Dr. Thomas Radler, this is part 2 of Years Without Rain.
Well, the next morning, I went to the church and I told my pastor that something had happened with my mother and father and they had kicked me out. He said, look, if you need a place to stay, you can stay at my place, my family's place, for a while. I remember telling him the story in more graphic detail, and I remember the look on his face. It was just, he was a torn man. He said, listen, I don't want you to tell your mom and dad that I helped you in this way, because I'm friends with your mom and dad, and I don't want them to know. And I thought to myself at that time, fair enough, buddy, I won't tell them. You're worse than my mom and dad. So I thought, right, I'll just take your offer and leave you.
Over the course of just a few hours, Ted's character had shifted from his normal, gentle self to demon warrior to offended house guest and back again. For people who knew him, this was an unprecedented, unpredictable Ted.
The course is highly variable. Some people have symptoms all the time. Some people have more of a fluctuating course of illness. There are a lot of other factors for a lot of people. If they're in very stressful, difficult living situations, that will worsen their symptoms.
While Ted struggled with worsening symptoms, his family struggled with their loss. Ted's brother, Vaughn.
I felt that I lost my best friend. Ted and I, when we were younger growing up, we were brothers, but we were also best friends in a lot of ways. So what was happening, it didn't seem like he was the best friend that I knew. Wow, I didn't think this could ever happen, but it did.
Ted's brother, Peter.
For me, I just kind of, okay, whatever, I didn't know how to process it because I knew who my brother was, and I knew who we all were growing up. It almost seemed like a bad nightmare. You're hearing all these things going on, and you you can't really make heads or tails of it. You just turn your world upside down.
If we do see people who are showing some subtle changes in their behavior, we would recommend to admit them to our program, to follow them very closely, to get a better understanding of what is going on, and hopefully change the course of what might be happening.
At this point, Ted's course is nothing if not changing, with only his on-again, off-again brain to guide him.
So I stayed a few days at his place. Around about the third day, I got the idea to phone my grandfather, who lived about a 5 hours drive south. And I didn't tell him very much over the phone. I just said I was looking for work. And I stayed at my grandfather's house till about a few days before Christmas, 1990. I looked for work. I visited the library. I went to the church that he attended, met some people there, made some contacts. Well, anyways, I told my grandfather exactly what had happened with my mother and father, but he was kind of oh, gee, this is my family, man. He said that I was going to come back with him to my folks for Christmas, and he was going to be the big peacemaker and make everything all right again. I just laughed. I told him that was absolutely not going to happen. I had no idea where I was going to stay when he went up for Christmas, and he told me that there was no way I could stay at his house.
Abandoned first by his parents and then his grandfather, Ted was again on his own.
Ted was always like that. Like he gave up his career in university and everything like that to go join a kibbutz. That was, people can look at that and say, wow, that's a little extreme. But I mean, that was Ted. If he was going to do something, he went all the way.
Well, when you're living out of somebody else's hand, there's all kinds of feelings that go through your mind. Don't know where you're going. You don't know what's going to happen to you. It's a strange way to live. But fortunately, these contacts that I had made with the church, I actually got a job with a logging company cutting trees. So I was a lumberjack for about a week, but I got injured. So that was the end of my job. But I was able to get some money, and that was helpful. And here again, right about that time, another contact in the church said that he was coming up to Thompson, and he said I could stay at his apartment until I found a job. And I got a job. Yeah, I got a job at a restaurant washing dishes. And when I got hurt with that logging company, I got a compensation check. So that compensation check went towards the damage deposit on my own apartment. A top floor apartment, 10 floors in the building, and the view faced the whole city. I can remember the first day I moved into this place, I was sure a happy guy, because I'd been living out of the hand of other people for some time now, and God's providing for you, but it sure doesn't feel good. I'll tell you that.
During his first loner year in Thompson, Ted's brothers would visit. His unpredictable behavior was both concerning and revealing.
I know that he stopped all communication with mom and dad. Like mom and dad would send him a Christmas card, he would send it back. He became more of a loner type guy. If there were times where I would come in and ask him, maybe we can go for lunch, he would say no. So I had to respect that because I still knew that there was something going on. I just didn't know what.
I should also say that the one other thing that I did when I came to Thompson was to get located in a church. And I found a church that I liked or I thought I liked. And the second job that I got here in Thompson was with a moving company. It was a lot of work. I had to quit there because I can't go into detail right here because there was things that happened to me overseas that had a toll on me physically. Physically, I wasn't able to put out. Well, I had to quit. So this was now summertime, 1991. It was a very tough summer because I had no job. Finances were very scarce. I was reduced to scrounging the ditches for beer bottles for their refund value. I was living quite meagerly. And I need to back up a little bit here and tell you about a thought process that I had. The whole 5 years overseas, I never asked a single person for a single penny. I just trusted in God, and all the money came in. So here I am, trusting in God, and I get this notice from a landlord saying that if I don't pay up in 3 days, I'm out of here. I was so mad. I went, buried my face in a pillow, and screamed as loud as I could. I said, God, where's my fucking money? Oh man, I was mad. Well, I didn't get zapped with a bolt of lightning for saying that. I think God understood my situation, and there was things afoot for this guy.
While his faith seldom wavered, Ted continued to keep his family at a safe distance.
Seemed that I really had to be careful of the words that I used because I could sense there was a tenseness there. It was talking about his relationship with mom and dad and how we felt it was important to reestablish that. I said to him, well, sometimes we got to make little sacrifices. Then he yelled out, sacrifices? He says, you don't know the sacrifices I've had to go through. One other time I was with him and we were driving around. He says, can you stop the car? So I stopped the car and he took out this buck knife, and it was a big buck knife. And he said, watch this, he said. And he took a cigarette lighter and he ran the flame through the blade 3 times. And he says, can you smell that? And I said, no. He says, well, that's the fragrance of the Holy Spirit. And so all these things that were happening just added more and more to my conclusion, I guess, that prior to him being diagnosed, there was something medically wrong. I knew that it had to be some kind of significant mental illness, but I didn't know what.
It's important to keep in mind that when Kraepelin created the concept of schizophrenia over 100 years ago, he actually called it dementia precox. So we already knew back then that for a lot of people, concentration, memory, and other cognitive abilities can be impaired with this illness. But even in the year 2024, it is still a clinical diagnosis. If we run additional tests, it's mainly to rule out other reasons for why people may present with these kinds of symptoms.
Meanwhile, back in Thompson, Ted, still unaware of his mental disorder, was desperately trying to make rent.
I don't know exactly how I handled it, but anyways, it was in one of my conversations with my landlord that she said, it's no shame to go and ask for welfare. And so that's what I did. I went down to the welfare office and got all my rent squared away and even a check for foodstuffs and whatnot. Well, the first month went by and it was nice to have the pressure off, but the clock ticks away and the end of the month came around and it was time to pay the rent. And of course I had no money, no job. So I thought if it worked with welfare so well the first time, it's got to work the same way the second time. And so I set off down to the welfare office and they gave me an interview with one of the workers there, and things were going pretty normal. And all of a sudden, this woman asks me a question about looking for work, and immediately her face gets very dark. And the best way that I can describe what happened next would be to say that I felt as if I was standing in front of 1,000 people on a stage with my pants down. Now I left that office with a check and the rent money, but I left there with something else. I left there with a feeling that I was the biggest fool for asking for money that ever lived. That month, I got full-time work.
Another change, this time from dark to light. Call it circumstance, guilt, pressure. Something snapped Ted out of his loner lifestyle. He turned on the charm and got a job.
People with schizophrenia are human beings who have a lot of talents, who have some deficiencies, but it's not unusual for them to be able to present themselves well in certain situations. And people who may not know about the diagnosis may be very surprised to hear that people are suffering. It's also very important to keep in mind that a lot of people nowadays who suffer from schizophrenia are able to lead very normal lives, very productive, happy, accomplished lives. But unfortunately, we also know that a lot of people who suffer from schizophrenia, even in 2024, with all the different treatment options that we now have available, do not get full benefits and still struggle with a lot of symptoms, even after treatment has been optimized.
This time, the job that I got was I worked at an auto dealership. I ferried customers back and forth to their homes while their cars were being worked on, and kind of a gopher position. I pretty much got along with everybody. There was some other people there that I didn't get along with, but the boss, well, let's just say we started off pretty good. But that was because he didn't know me and I didn't know him. But before I come to the conclusion of my time at this car dealership, I think there was a few other things that happened that need mentioning. I think around February of 1992, Louise officially sent me the ring back, breaking off the engagement, saying goodbye to the whole idea of marriage. I was quite shattered by this. I didn't believe something like that would happen. But before the real crunch set in, I wrote Louise a letter, and I told her that she was free to do what she wanted to do. I kind of hoped that she would see that I loved her and that I was doing the greatest thing that I think a human being can do for another person, is to give them their own freedom. Well, that was 1992, and it's 1999 now, and I haven't heard from her since. And I don't think I ever will hear from her. But anyways, it took me 5 months to get over that. Pretty tough going to work and you're all torn up.
Severely brokenhearted, Ted struggled to maintain some kind of normal work relationships, but kept his family at strict arm's length.
Being as close as I was with Ted during that time, like I think I alluded to it before, I felt lost. I felt a loss of relationship with my best friend. It just seemed that there was a part of life, my life, his life, that was totally being cut off.
And that's too bad, because for a lot of people, obviously, structure is helpful. Having contact with other people is helpful. And then I assume the isolation began.
Correct. Even with the stability of an apartment and a job, Ted was again isolating and slowly beginning to spiral out of control.
The second thing that happened took place in the spring of 1993. And the crux of the story was I was excommunicated from the church that I went to. I found the people in the church to be very immature, and I made mention of that fact. And they didn't take too kindly to that, and they kicked me out.
Ted was never shy. He never really would sugarcoat things. So he was telling me he started attending this one church in Thompson. He was in the service one Sunday morning, and the pastor was speaking on some topic, and Ted was sitting there. And this quote and unquote from Ted, he says, something just triggered in here, and it just resounded. And he stood up, goes, "Fucking A." No, he meant it in a positive way. And we laughed and laughed and laughed about that. And I says, yeah. He says, yeah, I realize maybe I could have used some other words, but the interesting part about that is they asked him in a nice way not to return. And one of the things I learned from that is when someone is going through a situation like this, especially with schizophrenia, you don't need rejection. You need more support and more grace, even if you can't understand it. So if there's a positive spin-off with Ted's life and what he went through, it would be that.
After that, I didn't join any other church. I just stayed on my own. I kind of figured if this church did this to me, then every other church in this town will probably do the same.
There were other, more serious episodes too.
A lot of the things that happened, I just thought was, man, this is weird. And I started to think, okay, well, there's something medically wrong here. I went to see him one time at his apartment, and he just told me, he said, sometimes, Vaughn, when I'm sleeping, I wake up and there's a dog that sits at the foot of my bed, and he tells me to follow him. And when I wake up, he says, I find myself out in the forest on my hands and knees in my underwear. I thought that was very strange, but I knew that this was becoming a reality for him. So I knew that there was a medical dysfunction that was going on with him. And I didn't understand that.
If people start to show symptoms of psychosis like hearing voices, being very paranoid, having difficulties putting their thoughts together, expressing themselves, those are all symptoms that lean more towards an early psychotic illness. But a mental health assessment should help to figure out what is going on. And even if we don't know what is going on, it's maybe reason enough to get people the help that they need to make sure that things get better and not worse. And
now we come to the concluding moments of my job at the car dealership and what brought that about. My boss would come into work on certain days in a very strange mood. He would have this great big smile on his face, but as he walked past me, he would say in a very cheery, upbeat, and high-pitched voice, "Good morning, Ted." And I would say, "Good morning, Brian." And I would find myself battling anger for no reason at all for about 2 or 3 hours. It took me quite a while to settle down. This happened time after time. Finally, one day, I'd had enough, and I was working outside on a van, putting a seat in the back part of it. I saw my boss coming out to me, and I could see clear as day he was in one of his moods again. And just before he got to me, the Lord spoke to me, and he said, "What's it going to be, Ted? Your job or peace of mind?" I didn't have to hesitate. I threw the seat down, and I walked away from my boss. He called after me. I didn't turn around. I kept walking. If I would have looked back over my shoulder, I would have saw my boss storming after me in a fit of rage, grabbed me by the arm. He pulled me into a private office, and he said, "What the fuck is going on? If you don't come and talk to me by 12 noon, you are dismissed." He left me and went back to his office, and I went back to my work. Around 11 o'clock that morning, he came back to me again, and he said, "Ted, if you don't talk to me, I will dismiss you." At 12 o'clock, I punched out and left the car dealership for the last time.
True to his schizophrenic symptoms, Ted again separated himself from the people who cared for him. But unlike his demon mother, who seemed to attack his very soul, Ted saw his boss more as a challenge to his peace of mind. Does this mean Ted's symptoms were less severe, maybe because his life situation had stabilized? Or did something else cause this new shift in behavior?
that's an excellent question. We still don't know for sure if we're talking about one illness or if we're more talking about the final pathway of a variety of different causes that then manifest themselves in the same constellation of symptoms. Even in the year 2024, schizophrenia remains primarily a clinical diagnosis. We have no tools, we have no markers to establish a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is still based on the presence of certain symptoms, including auditory hallucinations, that is, hearing voices, paranoid delusions, disorganized thinking, disorganized behavior, and what we call the negative symptoms, which is a lack of interest in social interactions and the withdrawal of the person suffering from these negative symptoms.
With negative and positive symptoms converging, Ted was only moments away from hitting rock bottom.
Well, if I thought that things were getting bad, I was about to find out that not only could they get even worse, they could get downright catastrophic.
Next, on Years Without Rain.
I felt a great dark force, and if I didn't get out of my apartment, something terrible was going to happen.
Ted is on the move.
And I'm in pain, serious pain. The only thing that made me feel good was to hit the wall with my fist.
And about to run headlong into authority.
When they put those handcuffs on me, I can never remember being so low in my entire life.
Will Ted get the help he needs? Years Without Rain. New episode next.